The morning my son was supposed to get married, I was hiding in the trunk of a car. Even now, 2 years later, saying those words aloud feels unreal. Like I'm repeating a scene from somebody else's life instead of my own. I was 63 years old, a retired dental hygienist from Barrie, Ontario. I volunteered at the food bank every Thursday, baked butter tarts for church events, and spent most evenings watching old quiz shows with a cup of tea in my lap. My life was quiet, predictable. Until that Saturday morning, I was curled beneath a rough wool blanket that smelled faintly of motor oil and dog hair while the trunk lid closed above me with a heavy metallic click. "Please don't make a sound, Mrs. Calloway," Felix whispered urgently before shutting it. "You need to see this for yourself." Felix Okafor had worked for our family for decades. He had driven my late husband Harold everywhere after Harold's eyesight started getting worse. He taught my son Connor how to tie a Windsor knot before prom. After Harold's funeral, Felix sat in the parking lot with me for almost an hour because I couldn't stop crying long enough to go home. Felix was one of the gentlest men I'd ever known. So when I heard fear in his voice that morning, I listened. My son Connor was 34, a software developer living in Waterloo, brilliant, kind-hearted, stubborn in exactly the same way his father had been. 2 years earlier, he'd met a woman named Simone at a conference in Vancouver. She was elegant and polished, the kind of woman who always looked composed even when everyone else was exhausted. She worked in financial consulting, traveled often, and seemed to know exactly what to say to make Connor feel important. I tried very hard to like her, but every conversation with Simone left me unsettled in ways I couldn't explain. She asked strange questions about Harold's estate, about the house, about whether Connor was the only beneficiary in my will. Whenever I hesitated, she smiled sweetly and said she was just interested in family history. I mentioned my concerns to Connor only once. "Mom," he sighed, "not everybody has hidden motives." Then he barely spoke to me for weeks afterward. So I stopped bringing it up. I smiled politely at Christmas dinners. I complimented her engagement ring. I pretended not to notice how often she checked her phone while Connor talked about their future. And all the while, something inside me kept whispering that something wasn't right. The wedding was planned for September in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Expensive venue, string quartet, vineyard views. Simone had organized every detail herself. The morning of the ceremony, Felix picked me up at 7 a.m. in his old Camry. Normally he listened to CBC radio while driving, but that day the car was silent. Halfway through the trip, he turned unexpectedly into a quiet residential neighborhood in Oakville and parked behind a row of hedges. I frowned. "Felix, what's going on?" He turned toward me slowly, his face pale. "I need you to listen carefully before you say anything," he said. Then he told me about his cousin Delia, who worked at a family law office in Toronto. 2 weeks earlier, she'd come across an archived divorce case while sorting records. The woman in the file was named Simone Beauchamp. Same date of birth, same address, same woman. The divorce had been finalized only 14 months earlier, and there was a child. An 8-year-old daughter named Lily. My chest went completely hollow. Felix handed me printed documents, custody records, legal filings, notes describing financial deception during Simone's marriage. Then another document tied to an ongoing investigation involving unlicensed investment advising and missing client funds. I read every page with trembling hands. "Does Connor know?" I whispered. Felix shook his head. "I found out 3 days ago," he admitted quietly. "I didn't know how to tell you." Outside the car window, sprinklers watered perfect lawns while leaves drifted across the sidewalks. Everything looked painfully ordinary. Then Felix said softly, "There's something else you need to see." That's how I ended up in the trunk, through a narrow gap beneath the lid. I could see part of a blue house across the street. A little girl's bicycle leaned against the porch railing. A man came outside first carrying a young girl wearing pink shoes. Then Simone stepped out behind them. She wasn't wearing a wedding gown, just casual cream-colored clothes. relaxed and comfortable like she belonged there. The little girl reached for her immediately. Simon kissed the child's forehead and hugged her tightly before handing her back to the man. Then she got into a rental car and drove away from her daughter. Away to marry my son. The little girl stood on the porch waving goodbye as the car disappeared down the street. I lay silently in that dark trunk, crying harder than I had in years, not because Simon had lead, because of that child, because somewhere in Oakville, an 8-year-old girl had no idea her mother was driving toward a second life built entirely on secrets. Felix let me out a few minutes later without saying a word. I straightened my dress, fixed my makeup as best I could, and got back into the passenger seat. How far to the venue? I asked. 45 minutes. I nodded slowly. Drive. The entire trip to Niagara-on-the-Lake felt unreal. I kept thinking about Connor as a little boy holding Harold's hand crossing streets, about the way he used to crawl into our bed after nightmares, about the future he thought he was walking into that morning. By the time we arrived, I knew I couldn't stay silent. I called him Connor. I said carefully, I need 5 minutes alone with you before the ceremony. A pause. Mom, is this about Simon? I love you more than anything, I replied. Please come outside. He met me near the parking lot wearing the charcoal suit we'd picked out together months earlier. For one heartbreaking second, he looked exactly like Harold. We sat together on a wooden bench near the garden. I handed him the documents. I didn't explain, didn't accuse, didn't dramatize. I simply let him read. The color slowly drained from his face. This could be another Simon Beauchamp, he said finally. Though even he sounded unconvinced, I touched his hand gently. Look at the address. He looked again. Silence. Then I said quietly, I saw her daughter this morning. Connor stopped breathing for a moment. I could actually see it happen. She has a child, he whispered. I nodded. And she never told you. He stared at the papers for a very long time. She would have told me eventually, he muttered weakly. If someone hides a marriage, a daughter, and an investigation, I said softly. That isn't forgetting, sweetheart. That's choosing. His face crumpled then in a way I hadn't seen since childhood. Not anger, grief, pure grief. He stood up suddenly and walked several feet away before stopping. You should have told me sooner, he said without turning around. And the painful truth was that he was right. I should have trusted my instincts months earlier instead of worrying about being disliked. I know, I whispered. I'm sorry. Connor went inside to confront her. I sat alone outside the venue listening to a string quartet continue playing cheerful music for guests who had no idea the wedding was collapsing in real time. 20 minutes later, Connor returned. His tie was loosened. His eyes were red. She admitted it. He said quietly, I waited. She said she didn't tell me about Lily because she thought I'd leave. A long silence passed between us. Turns out she was right. There was no dramatic screaming, no public fight, just the quiet death of a future. Connor went inside and told the guests the wedding was canceled. I watched him straighten his jacket before walking back through those doors. And in that moment, I realized something important about my son. Strength isn't loud. Sometimes strength looks like telling the truth when it destroys your own happiness. I've thought about Simon many times since. Then not with hatred anymore. Hatred burns out eventually and leaves only sadness behind. Because I do believe she loved her daughter. I saw it in the way she held her that morning. I even think she may have loved Connor in her own broken way, but love without honesty becomes manipulation, and real love does not ask someone to stop asking questions. Connor survived it. That's the important part. He buried himself in work for a while afterward. Then slowly, little pieces of him started returning. Last spring, he called me from the top of a hiking trail laughing breathlessly about black flies and bad coffee. And I remember sitting in my kitchen smiling because I could hear happiness in his voice again. There's my boy. I thought what I've learned from all this is simple. If something feels wrong, don't silence yourself just to keep the peace. Trust your instincts. Ask difficult questions because the pain of discovering the truth early is almost always smaller than the devastation of discovering it too late. And if you're lucky, the people you love will come back to you afterward. Connor did. That's enough for me.